Good morning, everybody. Wow, high energy today. Good morning. I'll ask a few of the people to sit down and grab their seats, and we'll get started on day 2. So good morning, and welcome to day 2 of the Asia Pacific Social Protection Week. My name is Vivek Raman. I'm a senior Operations Coordination Specialist here at the Sustainable Development Department. That's a mouthful, I know. I heard that day 1 has been incredibly productive, and we are hoping to continue the same energy and momentum onto day 2. We have some exciting sessions lined up for you. We are starting with a special session right after this, which is going to be celebrating the centenary year of the International Labour Organization, followed by a panel discussion, which will have some interesting speakers discussing the new world of work that we have. And it's going to feature speakers from the government of Sri Lanka, ILO, OECD, as well as from Grab Singapore. So I'm sure many of you people who are frustrated with the Grab app here in Manila or Singapore might have a few questions to throw at the audience, at the panel members here today. Right after lunch, we will be breaking out into breakout sessions, and I think they'll all be here. The rooms will be split up into 4. You will be familiar from yesterday. And it's going to have speakers and topics ranging from universal health coverage, child benefits, as well as inclusive participation of people with with disabilities. As you know, I believe there was some confusion regarding the event app. And you know that we are trying here very hard at ADB to go paperless. So was there any confusion yesterday about the app? A show of hands, please. All right, I can see some people nodding their heads. So please log on to go to your app store. First, log on to the Wi-Fi of ADB, and the password is right there. If you log on to the app store, you will be able to download the Events Air app. And once you do that, you will have an event code, which is SPW2019, SPW2019. Once you log in there, you can check your registration email. It has a password. And in case you need some more help, we have a help desk right outside where you can get this sorted out. And also our colleague Eileen, wave your hand to the wonderful audience, okay, who can also help you solve any questions that you may have regarding logging on. Please do download this. All the presentations have been uploaded. You can also see changes to the agenda if there are any, and it is an information powerhouse, as we would say here at ADB. So I would now like to introduce Vicky Tan, who is the Principal Director of the Department of Communications here at ADB, to take over and start the next session, please. So thank you very much, and enjoy day 2.
Thank you and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be moderating this morning's special session, which is organized in close collaboration with the International Labour Organization, or the ILO. 2019 is the centenary year of the ILO. Since 1919, the ILO has worked with governments, employers, and workers from its 187 member states to set labor standards, develop policies, devise programs promoting decent work and work environments for women and men. In the context of social protection, ILO has been actively promoting policies and provides assistance to countries to help extend adequate levels of social protection to all members of society. Let us start this morning's session with a brief video of the ILO and what it means in celebrating its 100th year. Thank you.
Whereas universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based upon social justice.
Considerando que existen condiciones de trabajo que entrañan tal grado de injusticia, miseria y privaciones para gran número de seres humanos.
以致产生如此巨大的动荡，使世界和平与和谐遭受危害。
Принимая во внимание срочную необходимость улучшения этих условий. Par exemple, en ce qui concerne la réglementation des heures de travail, la fixation d'une durée maximum de la journée et de la semaine de travail,
Regelung des Arbeitsmarktes, Verhütung der Arbeitslosigkeit,
وتوفير أجر يكفل ظروف معيشة مناسبة.
Protección del trabajador contra las enfermedades, sean o no profesionales, y contra los accidentes de trabajo.
La protection des enfants, des adolescents et des femmes.
Пенсии по старости и инвалидности.
protection of the interests of workers when employed in countries other than their own,
Anerkennung des Grundsatzes gleicher Lohn für gleichwertige Arbeit.
承认结社自由的原则。
Organización de la enseñanza profesional y técnica y otras medidas análogas.
Attendu que la non-adoption par une nation quelconque d'un régime de travail réellement humain
is an obstacle in the way of other nations which desire to improve the conditions in their own countries.
فإن الأطراف السامية المتعاقدة تقرر مدفوعة بمشاعر العدالة والإنسانية.
А также желанием обеспечить прочный мир во всем мире.
并为实现本序言所提出的各项目标
Agreed to the following constitution of the International Labour Organization.
The ILO has a constitutional responsibility to build a future of work which corresponds to our mandated goals of social justice. We have 100 years of experience in making our world a fairer, safer place to work and a better place to live.
Now that was a very striking video. ILO is truly an organization rich in history and experience. To learn more about the ILO and the evolution of its policies and programs related to the dynamic changes of our region and the anticipated changes in the future of work, I'd like to introduce Ms. Tomoko Nishimoto, the Assistant Director General of the ILO. Ms. Tomoko Nishimoto has served as the ILO's Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific since January 2015. In this role, she oversees the ILO's operations in 34 of the ILO's 36 member states in our region. A key part of her role is to stimulate and foster dialogue between social partners, helping them to develop and implement coherent strategies that address the intertwined issues of sustainable development. In particular, Ms. Nishimoto supports the development of countries' capacities to respond to the increasingly complex issues in a rapidly evolving world of work. From the Asia-Pacific Regional Meeting in 2016 and at the national and regional dialogues on the future of work, Ms. Nishimoto is at the forefront of the ILO's mission of promoting jobs and protecting people. Ms. Nishimoto has more than 30 years' experience in the UN system, in senior management roles in the UNDP, in UNICEF, and UNEP, in both field offices and at the agency headquarters. These experiences span a wide spectrum of programs and operations, from programming, monitoring and evaluation, financial management, human resource management, and communication and advocacy. We are thus very fortunate to have Ms. Nishimoto here with us today to share with us her rich experience. Let me now invite Ms. Nishimoto to deliver her keynote remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. Allow me to start by thanking the ADB for inviting the ILO to be part of this very important event. We are very honored to join you all in this effort to expand social protection programs in this region. Ladies and gentlemen, the short video we have seen gave us a very snapshot of the ILO's mandate. Actually, it was a bit difficult to understand for the first time you see it, because it was the ILO mandate or constitution, preamble of the constitution was recited in the 6 UN languages. And we may call the constitution of the ILO perhaps the most ambitious social contract in history. If you read just the preamble, it really gives you the ambitious level of fairness and social justice that our founders 100 years ago, out of the wreckages of the World War I, it will hit you that it's so relevant today as well, particularly in this region where the injustice and inequalities are still rampant. So it was the history of the 100 years of struggle for social justice, 100 years of tripartite dialogue. This is also very important. At the time of the founding of the ILO, and later on, it was called a wild dream. You know, the dream where out of the wreckage of, as I mentioned, the World War that destroyed everywhere, that the dream to re-establish the regulation of the labor issues, and do it so even with the tripartite parties, employers, government, and workers coming together and discuss and establish the international standard for labor, for the world work. It was seen the wild dream, and it continued to be a wild dream in our struggle. And as you can imagine, that part of the tripartite relations within the multilateral system continue to be a very wild dream. It's working, but it is still the only organization within the multilateral system, particularly within the UN system, the only organization where the workers, employers, and government sit together at the governing body and make the decisions together through the dialogue, and the workers and employers have the equal voting opportunity for the decisions made for the organization. This is a very different ways of doing purely the intergovernmental organization, even if that intergovernmental dialogue has a space for the civil society consultation. It is very different when they have the equal speaking space and equal voting rights. So we stand on this wide dream and continue to dream on this wide dream. And we do have the achievement in the last 100 years. And indeed, a prestigious recognition of what it has achieved, what the ILO achieved, was the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to the ILO in 1969. We have that award of Nobel Peace Prize. And I think the gist of that Nobel Peace Prize, again, is really reflected, embedded in the constitution of ILO, meaning that poverty is a threat. Poverty anywhere is a threat to everywhere. And the lasting peace cannot be achieved, or can achieved only when you have the social justice and the adequate living conditions for all. So that's the mandate, and it was the achievement of the 100 years. And yet, we feel there is no time for complacency, and I think you would agree. We are living at a time when the lives of millions of people around the world are still affected by deepening and widespread inequalities and the profound injustices. The situation is ever more complex due to the unprecedented level of disruptions in their working lives. That is why, above all, the ILO centenary celebrations are focused on the future rather than the past achievement. The Future of Work initiative has been a central theme of the ILO 100 commemoration. Most recently, in June 2019, the International Labour Conference. This happened annually every year, but this was the historic ILO at the time of towards the second century, adopted the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work. Its adoption took place at the time the transformative change in the world of work is happening, and those are driven by the technological innovations, demographic shift, climate change, and globalization, to name a few mega trends. For example, mention the future of work, and very quickly, question will arise. Will robots steal my work? As the technological advancement will drastically reduce the number of jobs? Or even some people ask, referring to the AI, will my boss be an algorithm? You know, the technological advancement are affected world work so widely and profoundly. And this fast, profound, and wide range of changes give rise to many uncertainties in our societies, uncertainties that leading people to question the capacity of our institutions, our policies, to provide them with the type of future that they want. There is a pressure and question about our institutions, our policies, because they don't see that those are responding to the changes that are profoundly happening in their lives. But the point here is the basic concept of fairness, which support ILO's notion of social justice, embedded, as I mentioned, in the ILO Constitution. Those really the basic principles are being shaken and sometimes undermined in the midst of all these transformations and disruptions. And that implicit social contract, as I mentioned, really embedded 100 years ago in the constitution of the ILO. That social contract, which underpin the work in society, is being questioned now. And it's being put under great pressure, and people worry that it no longer exists. People won't see the social contract protecting them. Acknowledge this comes at a time with a certain frustration that the debate on the future work, which after all is the debate about the future of our societies, is sometimes so narrowly, this debate is so narrowly defined only through the impact of new technologies. You might have heard Industrial 4.0 and many of the ways that is calling this technological advancement. But we believe that it should not be about technologies. We have to think in a different ways. We are not the victim or the witness to techno-determinism. Rather, it is up to us to decide how to manage that technology or any disruption for that matter. In other words, the fate is dependent on our action. The current technological revolution does have the capacity to affect not just the number of jobs that will be available in the future, but also the types of jobs that are out there. It has the capacity to change the very nature of the way we work is organized and undertaken. And that is where the policies and our action comes from. The technology affects the way that we work, can be seen quite clearly in the advent of the platform or the gig economy, where the established institutions of work, which the ILO has done so much to establish over the last century, just don't seems to apply anymore. Who is an employee? ILO's regulations and so on are based on the employers and employees and the institutions to govern it, pretty much looking at the formal sector. But in those technological advancement and in gig economy, who is employer? Who is an employee? And what does working time means in the gig economy? In fact, one of the achievements in the last 100 years, very first time that we had was regulating the working hours and putting the weekends in time, the rest of time. And before the World War I, there wasn't a contract that the people are almost like a semi-slave, working hours and long hours. So that we had now the standards regulating working time, putting the weekends and so on. But in the gig economy, what does the work time sovereignty means? What is the workplace, even virtually intermediated work? Where's the workplace? That we have to craft implement the policies and the institution of the work that will steer us in the right direction in this all involving the world of work. And the right direction is not the direction dictated by the technology, trying to be the most advanced and so on. It's the direction which is decided by our social preferences and our capacity, and most importantly, our will to act upon those changes. Many of the issues that ILO is working on these days do reflect those profound changes that are fairly new. As I mentioned, the gig economy and those platform economies didn't exist 100 years ago. Climate change and the need to transition from a so-called brown economy, the fossil fuel-based economy, to a sustainable, low or even no carbon future of the production system is another example. So is the demographic change. In this region, there are still countries trying to provide relevant opportunities, work opportunities and jobs to the growing young workforce. At the same time, aging is a huge problem for some of the countries. And many countries in this region, they have both realities to balance at this time of their histories. So ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world where uncertainty is the only certainty, where also multiple disruptions are taking place at an unprecedented level of the fast pace, and people are becoming vulnerable, particularly those who are already vulnerable and live with a high degree of decent work deficit, what we call decent work deficit, in terms of the rights, in terms of their protection. Those people who do not enjoy the decent work element become even more vulnerable in the face of these disruptions. And the chances that if we do not do anything in terms of the policies and regulations, the chances of their being even farther left behind would increase. So under these circumstances, we believe decent work in the context of with a very comprehensive concept is a powerful means as well as an end to sustainable development with greater equity and social justice. We need to pay attention to labor markets, because while they are the primary source of income opportunities around the world, left unregulated, they often instigate and exacerbate inequalities. We know that inequalities are structural. Noteworthy here is that the risk of unemployment is higher for women, the vulnerable group, and low-income workers, already vulnerable.
Also, low-wage jobs are more often correlated with irregular workers, irregular hours, hazardous work, and lack of social protection. This is why appropriate regulations is so important in providing decent work. Our Centenary Declaration of Future Work attempts to provide some answers to these challenges. It provides concrete recommendations for the delivery of social justice in the 21st century and for shaping a fair, inclusive, and secure future of work. The Centenary Declaration is also a roadmap for the ILO as it enters into the second century. Now, in order to move forward towards a just and sustainable future, our declaration proposes what we call a human-centered approach to the future of work. The agenda which clearly articulates that human welfare is the ultimate aim and objective of public policies. I think it is close to your heart, and it is a reiteration of the principles you hold dearly, but a Centenary Declaration reiterated and calls for the human-centered approach. Concretely, this means they called the much more investment in three categories. One is investing in people. Two, investing the institutions. And three, two is invest in the institution of and for the world of work. And three, investing in the policies that promotes sustainable and decent jobs. The first area of investing in people means investing in skills. As you know, that upskilling, reskilling, and so on is very important to cope with those disruptions. And it calls for the effective lifelong learning, almost as an entitlement for every workers to have the lifelong learning opportunities as well as the quality education for all. It places a particular emphasis on gender equality in opportunities and treatment. And of course, here the investing on social protection is very much emphasized. Our declaration calls for universal access to comprehensive and sustainable social protection. And I think, again, it is very important to mention here, this is not a call from the government only. It is a call agreed upon from the government, of course, but also from the workers, of course, but also employers, sometimes a little bit reluctant for seeing the elements of it. This is, you can refer to it when you face to the private sector employers, this is the declaration by tripartite partners all. And the second area is investing in those institutions of the labor market so the workers' fundamental rights are respected. It means minimum wage is adequate wage to live upon. It means placing limits in working time in the world where so many workers work to the point of exhaustion. You know, with email and so on, I'm sure your work follows you everywhere you go. It means ensuring a right to a healthy and safe workplaces when nearly 3 million people die every year because of the work-related causes. Again, in this area of investing in the institution, we cannot underestimate the role of social protection as one of the key pillars of the labor market institutions. So again, it's very relevant to you. Again, this is called by 3 parties, including employers. The third area is investing in adopting policies that promote sustainable economic growth and decent work for all. It means calling for policies for full and productive employment and decent work for all. This is nothing new. If you look at SDG 8. It's there. We reiterated that. It calls for policies to promote the creation of sustainable enterprises, innovation, and the transition from the informal to formal economy. Again, this point is particularly important for this region where majority of the workers work in the informal sector. World average is 60%. Here we have the countries 70, 80, even 90% of the workers are working in the informal setting where the formal labor standards are not applicable. So looking at the size of the informal economy in this region, I would very much highlight the important role of the social protection can play for the transition from the informal and formal economy. And I'm sure this point will be discussed again in the later stage at one of the technical sessions. Dear participants, so what the Centenary Declaration calls for is the convergence, very much convergence with the United Nations Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the SDGs which come along with it. This includes the universal access of comprehensive and sustainable social protection, as I mentioned. So it's very much of the declaration for you who work in the promotion of the social protection. In many ways, the recent years has been an exciting time in this region. In that context, dynamic growth and challenging political winds have put the region at the threshold of the new world order. To a certain degree, the impressive economic growth, as you know, the record high compared with other regions, and the labor productivity gains have filtered down to the improved well-being of the region's workers and their dependent. The link between the economic growth, productivity gains, to improve well-being of workers is extremely important in this region where we have the world's largest population of the workers in the working age populations and the world's lowest unemployment rate. Although the aggregated labor market picture seems to be somewhat positive, we have jobs, we have less or fewer unemployed people, but as I'm sure that you all know, coming from the region particularly and working for the region, that we have a long way to go bringing the decent work and shared prosperity to all workers and the families in the region. Even with rapid growth, economic growth, going into the 7% on average in the last decades in the region, lived in moderate or even with that growth and rapid progress in the poverty reduction. Yes, aggregated level you can cite in your own countries, so much percentage of the people are now out of extreme poverty and so on. Those are very positive figures. And yet, still, 1/4 of the all workers in this region, that is 440 million workers, live in the moderate or extreme poverty, according to the statistics in 2017. So you work hard, you have the job, but you are still at the borderline of the modest or extreme poverty. And 930 million workers, that is every 1 out of 2 workers, remain in the vulnerable employment. 1 out of 4 still live below the poverty line. So if you have this gathering truly reflect of the profile of the region's workers, if you look next to you, the participants, he is or she is in the vulnerable employment. If sitting 4 in the line, one of you is under poverty line, even if you have a job. That's the kind of profile of the workers' income level and working condition in this region. Unless unless there is much, much more conscious effort to tackle these inequalities, structurally induced inequalities, and decent work deficit, the situation could be worse, as I mentioned, in the face of this disruption. This is where the discussion on the relationship between the future of work and social protection becomes critical. This point, as I mentioned, was already emphasized in the wake of the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015. World leaders, you may know this, the world leaders launched an unprecedented effort to roll out universal social protection in countries all around the world. Heads of the states, the World Bank, and the ILO inaugurated the Global Partnership for Universal Social Protection, which aims to make pension, maternity, disability, and child benefits, among others, available to all persons, closing the gap for hundreds of millions currently unprotected. We would like to use this opportunity to invite more countries in Asia and the Pacific and regional organizations to join us in that global partnership. And I would like you to be a champion calling for joining this alliance of like-minded to push and promote the social protection coverage for the very vulnerable. Now, unfortunately, again, this political will, almost 4.5 going into the 5 years ago, despite those that the region are not positive. A region's picture of the region in the social protection is not so positive. And again, working in the social protection, you may not know this, but reiterate, almost 65% of mothers with a newborn do not receive maternity benefit. That's more than half of the mothers do not have a maternity protection. Only 22 of the unemployed are covered by the unemployment benefits. That's one of 4. And still, only 45% of all the persons 45% of all the persons do not receive a pension. So again, pension alone is not a great news. But the good news is that it is possible to reverse this situation. Data released by the members of the Global Partnership shows that more than 23 low and middle income countries have already achieved universal or near universal social protection schemes. So it's good news. So we need more countries striving for it. And over 100 countries are scaling up social protection and fast-tracking expansion of the benefit to new population groups. So momentum is with us. So this is a good news. These examples demonstrated that universal protection is feasible for other countries, especially low and middle income countries. So the financial or the income level of the country cannot be an excuse. This good example also highlights that national ownership enhanced through the dialogue and the creation of the culture of social protection is key to developing sustainable social protection systems, including social protection floors. Dear participants, another good news is that many of these countries, the low and middle income countries that are expanding the social protection programs, are from this region. Countries like China and Thailand have demonstrated that it is possible to reach the high level of coverage in a relatively very short period of time. Both reached very close to universal coverage for health and pensions. Nepal, I see their colleagues from Nepal, Timor-Leste, and Samoa shows everyone that even every country, that even the developing countries can reach the universal coverage for pensions. In recent years, Vietnam and Indonesia made a significant stride in terms of social health protection. Mongolia is also a positive example of a country which comprehensive social protection system, including levels of coverage for children and maternal protection, is realized or being worked on. So the list can be longer. More and more government in our region are starting to place social protection at the core of their development agenda. So this is a very good news, and the discussion at this forum becomes very important to take back home and even push for that, a very increasingly becoming stronger political will. This is the really evidence and the good news that more and more countries are recognizing to put the social protection at the center of their development agenda, particularly tackling the poverty and the inequalities. It's not just the tackling the poverty. We know that social protection also increases productivity and employability by enhancing the human capital and allowing investment in productive assets, raising household income, consumption, and savings, boosting aggregate demand, and enhancing people's resilience in the face of shocks and structural transformations. So social protection is a winning solution for everyone, both from the protection side, from the growth side, and as after all, for the sustainable, just, inclusive society. I feel that I probably is talking to the converted, but it's very nice to have that energy, uplifting energy to confirm in this region. And still on a positive tone and positive note, it is also important to recognize the good examples, such as the role of ASEAN in advocating for improved social protection and progressive extension of the coverage to all the people in those countries, following a life-cycle approach. The ASEAN countries' representatives may know that in 2013, during the 23rd ASEAN Summit, it's a summit, so the head of the states level led to the adoption of the ASEAN Declaration on Strengthening the Social Protection by the 10 ASEAN head of states, placing the completion of social protection floors as a priority to achieve growth and equity. So it's 2013, clearly seeing that political level commitment at the head of the states, at the summit level, is yielding a certain degree of the success. As I said, the good news are coming from this region. And also I would like to take this opportunity to highlight the critical role of the Asian Development Bank in promoting social protection. So the regional entities are very important to bring the political will as well as the programs to a regional level. For example, in terms of the Asian Development Bank, during the financial crisis, ADB provided assistance to many developing countries to help expand social security programs to cover millions who were hurt by this financial crisis. The policies and programs of the ADB's social protection strategy aimed to help people in the region break the cycle of poverty, enhance growth through investment in human capital, increase productivity, and produce people vulnerable to risks. So you can see the convergence of the ADB's principles and the work in social protection and the mandate of ILO, and we have a great collaborative work being done at many levels between the ILO and the ADB. And as far as the ILO is concerned, with that mandate of social justice, we can bring many means of actions to bear to help us move in the direction of universal social protection. We have the capacity to give policy advice based on our accumulation of research and the knowledge of labor market around the globe. We also have the capacity to work with our member states through development cooperation perspectives, the project on the ground. We have the capacity to convene, as I mentioned, and promote social dialogue, the dialogue in the society, in a very unique setting that not just the workers are invited, but sit together as the partner with the government, so as the employers. But above all, it is ILO's normative function, I must say, that is fundamental to realizing the social protection for all. Normative function to set the standard, to set the norm that every country, every member state should be abided by. We set the global rules of the game for social protection, and for labor market remain pivotal today in ensuring that economic growth, social progress, and equity go hand in hand. Not just the policies for economic growth, not just policies of the protection, not just for the social equality. We have the set of the standard and global policy combined together, so the growth, protection, and social justice, social progress go hand in hand. This is, again, is very important and convergence to with the Agenda 2030. You may have heard talking about SDGs, integrated approach, more breaking the silo. It's not just growth or environmental protection, growth or social it doesn't trickle down. It's not the economic growth first, and then eventually we'll have the social progress. No, it has to be from the start. The growth has to be inclusive. Growth has to come with the protection. It is not either or sequence. It is tackled as a simultaneous integrated policy. So I would like to share in closing the three elements which needs to be kept at the center stage in moving towards broader and deeper social protection coverage for all, as a food for thought. First, making universal access a reality requires a significant increase of public expenditure in social protection. This is a message to the government officials. This is a message to the to those who have the access to the ministers and higher political decision-making process. It is not possible unless you allocate more public resources. If countries are serious in their commitment, it is now to look at public expenditure and have the corrective action as needed, or else the rising there will be a risk of not being able to, not only the coverage being expanded, but also falling far short of the SDG target by 2030. So more resources from the public expenditure for social protection. That's the message number one. Number two, if more resources, even if more resources are allocated, actors, all of you involved in the social protection, needs to ensure a more effective delivery. The more resources come in, but not business as usual. You have to have a very critical look at the resources, how to use it, how to bring the programs that are very effective, have a greater impact with the same amount of money. So delivery has to be much more effective. The management of and the governance of the social protection needs to be at the core of the effort to extend social protection or discuss it, not only how to find the money, discuss it, how effectively use the money, how to design the social protection schemes and programs. That's the message number 2. Finally, message number 3. Considering a world in a rapid transformation, social protection systems needs to adapt in the changing characteristics of the world, or more specifically, the world of work, and prepare for what will be for the future. This is very hard because the changes are very hard. ILO also, as I mentioned, we were looking at the old labor standards. Many of them still, maternal protection, working hours, many of them are still very valid, but some of them are becoming obsolete. But also that there are significant areas that we don't have the labor standard to regulate in the just transition, climate change, as well as the technological advancement, gig economy, as I mentioned. So it's the same, the social protection schemes, you can't just cut and paste from the past, what worked in country X, country Y, and put it together. Not just because there are cultural difference, because the development level is different, but also in your own country, the wave of disruptions are going to come, and it's very fast. And the social protection schemes also continuously being reviewed and adopted, very agile schemes. It's related to the second part, the effective, but what is the agile social protection means, and what is your role in making sure those agility of the scheme. So that's the 3 food for thought. How is, I think, for this week to discuss. And we have a very steep hill to climb up, but the opportunities are there, and you are the champions for make sure that those opportunities are exploited to the maximum. And I end by thanking you all for your leadership, your determination, and really your effort to take the social protection program to extend to those who really needed it most. Thank you very much.
Well, we now open the floor to your questions, and would like to hear from the countries. As Ms. Nishimoto had indicated, one of the strengths of the ILO as a multilateral institution is its convening power. And one of the distinguishing features of the ILO is its ability to call together a tripartite type of dialogue, which is with governments, with employers, and with workers. I'm sure within our audience we have many from these 3 different sectors, so that's one. Secondly, in terms of format, we can do it 2 ways. We'd like to encourage you to please stand up, introduce yourselves, and please throw your question, give us the context of your question. If you're a bit shy, you can also send us your questions through the events app, which then I can read from this iPad. So with that, is anyone available to send his or her question, please? And we have ushers in the floor. Yes, please. From our colleague from Indonesia, perhaps?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Actually, looking for current situation, which is number of limited job opportunity or labor market, is actually possible to rely on the conventional of the labor market. So creating or encouraging entrepreneurship is, I think, for example, in Indonesia, is one of the solution. For example, for young age, not to mention young age. Actually, we trying to our beneficiaries. For example, for our conditional cash transfer beneficiaries, which is a number of people who lack of skill, can trying to start create entrepreneurship with connect with the micro finance. Just wondering how to escalate this policy. Actually, how these young age people and then those who lack of skill can connect to the microfinance, and how to escalate this policy to nationwide, and what is your perspective in ILO perspective? Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a question coming from this changing demographics of the young, some with less skilled, less ability to cope with the changing environment of technology and the future of workplace, and how we connect those to microfinance agencies, and lastly, how the ILO can help in this regard. So that's the first question coming from Indonesia, which has a growing population, a very young and dynamic population. Can I invite more questions, please? Yes.
So thank you for a very informative presentations. I'm from Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste has one of the youngest population in the Asian Pacific region, and the population below age 35 account for 70% of total populations. That's why one of the data from our National Human Development Report 2018. So my question is, what advice you can give to our government in order to be able to support our young people with decent jobs and works, given our country limited resources? I mean, we are listed under one of the lower middle income country. Thank you.
So again, a young country with limited population in a way, but growing, and then with limited natural resources. So what would be the type of advice to prepare this young population? If I can have a third question, and then we group them together, and for Ms. Nishimoto to then address them. Is there any one more question? So maybe I can, yes, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sum Sopon. I'm Deputy Director of the National Society Fund of Cambodia. I recommend to ILO for suggestion or recommendation to the portability of Asian country, especially for CLMTV, that we have the soon future in 17 this month in Siem Reap for conference, ministerial conference for CLMTV, mean that Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thai and Vietnam, how to move together with Asian country, especially for CLMTV, for portability of society, especially pension. This I recommend to ILO how to assist this conference to move portability as soon as possible for the contact of Asian country. Thank you.
Thank you. So the gentleman from Cambodia is making reference to this subgrouping in the Mekong region, which is Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Thailand. This regional subgrouping is going to meet sometime this month, I think the 17th of September, to discuss. So the question is, given a sub-regional grouping, which has some, of course, dialogue ongoing, what can be done in terms of the portability, portability, not just within the sub-region, Mekong sub-region, but around the Southeast Asian countries in terms of pension systems and maybe dialogue around social protection on pension systems, I think is the question. Thank you. Maybe with that we pause and we'd like to hear from Ms. Nishimoto.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I think this reflects the fact that, in the face of those disruptions, that the past way of looking at education and TVET separately from the social protection scheme, from the economic development policies will not work. It is called, what is called for is really breaking the silos. And I know it has been very difficult for the countries to have the interministerial dialogue and have a policy that goes across the portfolio of a minister who, is a political, in a way, a figure, and the technical people sees the links and so on. It's been very difficult. Some countries have been very successful, but at the technical and political leadership level, I think there is a growing recognition that answer is not within my ministry, answer is not within my expertise. Answer has to be really a combination and complex ways of putting the policy sequentially. This is a big, big statement to answer many of the questions that we have done. What does it mean? It means not just also the breaking the silos, but also think about short term. Those, as you mentioned, that already are growing youth unemployment issues. So you must do something now. But also in 5 years, 10 years, those who come into the labor force, labor market as a young labor workers must be much better prepared to come. So the first question of right now what to do is the a current TVET skills situation, but also looking at how the private enterprises are prepared to take on part of the skills gap fulfilling, i.e. the apprenticeship schemes and so on, or if it is not the employment at the enterprise, what kind of schemes the government and perhaps the private and public as a PPP effort to put the start your own, program, help the youngsters. We have improve your if you have already a small business, then improve your business schemes and so on. So you have to have that kind of scheme. So the short term, you need to look at how do we making sure that all variety of the schemes to provide. There was a mentioning of the funding schemes. Small to medium funding will have to be available. Startups have to be supported. There are a number of donors also now. The innovation is a buzzword now, so they are very willing to establish some kind of scheme to help the youngsters who have bright ideas but may not have the means to put that into action. So that's the kind of effort being done. At the same time, some countries bringing in the social protection element in it. Some countries, I know, for example, Singapore, when you are not equipped with the skills that is necessary, or you are still young, but 1 or 2 years, 3 years working, you are already not having the skills to adapt, or your jobs are very same skills jobs, so they are taken away by the introduction of some kind of mechanization or technological advancement. Call centers and so on are very typical example. Then you will have to have some kind of schemes, unemployment schemes, or you'll be given allowance when you are taking the time off from work and enter into the reskills, upskills programs to re-enter into the labor market where the demand of your skills is there. So it's the combination of the TVET area, it's combination of talking to the private sector through perhaps the labor administration institutions, it's the employment promotion schemes and so on. So it's a combination of variety of things that needs to be done. And that is only talking about what you can do in the country. And then, as mentioned, in many countries, that you will have to rely on both domestic labor market as well as the external market. And this migrant workers schemes are very much looked at to respond to the changes happening. Not only traditionally making sure that those migrant workers are well prepared to go into there so that they are not at the mercy of the agent or some, those who are trying to take advantage of you being vulnerable, so they are aware of their rights and your entitlement and so on. Not only that, also there are a number of effort to find out in a regional level, also cross-regional level, which countries are providing what type of workers, and those type of workers are needed where. For example, some of the countries, I think particularly like the Bangladesh and so on, their workers are becoming more skills a little bit upgraded, and therefore they are looking for a different destination countries. But the countries that they have supplied lower skills workers, they still require the lower skills workers. And then they are now looking at, for example, something like Afghanistan. Afghanistan minister was talking about it. Such and such a country has a reduced workers coming from Bangladesh. We can fill in that void as such. So really a lot of analysis, and I know the B2B discussion, G2G, government-to-government discussions is going on. A lot of times that kind of strategic and comprehensive discussion could be done. Seasonal workers for Australia and New Zealand, this has always been discussed very extensively for those who send like Pacific Island countries. So that's the kind of immediate, and then it's going on. And but also I think it's so important that, and declaration, our declaration mentioned is a reform of the education system. A longer term, you can't keep doing that when the youngsters are coming into the labor market equally unprepared as is now. Okay, we didn't know this disruption are coming. It's so fast changing, so we were caught unprepared. But now we know that only uncertainty is a certainty. We know that soft skills are very important. Adaptability, the communication skills, initiatives, self-motivation, all these skills, as well as these soft skills, as well as the technical skills, are important. Let us prepare them from the young age. Or STEM, science and technology, engineering. We always talk about STEM, bringing in more girls and women to the STEMs. Yes, it's true, but also equally for boys and so on. We know how the technologies are going. We know we may not exactly have the crystal ball that looks like, but the direction is clear. And if that is the case, let's look at the long-term changes that are necessary as well. Bringing the private sectors also. Take them also responsibility. Nowadays, those corporate social responsibility linked to just the charity work is over. They are really taking on the corporate social responsibility to make sure that their contribution is also just and sustainable development path. Let's take advantage of it. There are many enterprises are willing to come on board to devise both immediate and medium-term schemes. That's all we can say.
Thank you, Ms. Nishimoto.
I don't know if this last question of Cambodia, if I may, I would like to perhaps invite my technical people to respond because it's a very specific area and we are heavily involved and I may not be up to date on that.
Thank you. So maybe we can request, and can we have the microphone, please, for our colleague from the ILO to respond to this specific question about the portability of pension schemes across Southeast Asian countries.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm Nunu Cunha, I'm social protection specialist. I'll be talking in the next session. I mean, I'm not going to enter in technical too much, but just we have been discussing, we know that it's important to ensure that migrant workers, particularly in a reality where we see increasing numbers of people crossing borders looking for more opportunities, we need to ensure, and it's a question of equality of treatment, that everyone has the same treatment independent of nationality. Then portability agreements are one way of doing it. Our recommendation has been for countries to start, maybe starting by bilateral discussions. I mean, we are very happy in terms of our technical capacity to support these discussions in ASEAN, but also outside. We also can look at good examples in the region. One good example is Philippines, and use good examples also to influence and to bring that knowledge for other countries. But maybe we can have further discussions on that details in another session. I will leave it for the moment like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm being signaled by our organizers that it's time for coffee break. We've kept you with us for more than an hour. So please do take advantage of the access either to the events app and or having direct chats with our resource persons during coffee break to further the dialogue. With that, I'd like to thank everyone's interest and of course to the ILO, to Ms. Nishimoto for her valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting session. I just wanted to remind everybody of two things. One, the exhibition is ongoing outside, and I was just told that there are some fantastic freebies as well if you stop at the counter, so that's really a nice incentive to go and learn something. Two, we'll shorten the break to 15 minutes, and if everybody could be back here at 10:35 for the panel discussion, that would be great. So thank you very much and enjoy the coffee.